My father's armchair sat empty, a hollow reminder of the void he left behind. The leather was still molded to his shape, and sometimes I caught myself staring at it, half expecting him to materialize with his crossword puzzle and reading glasses. The house felt different now. Even the sunlight streaming through the windows seemed dimmer, as if it too was mourning his absence. Gareth moved through the rooms like a ghost, his footsteps barely making a sound on the hardwood floors. When our eyes met, his gaze would shift away, finding sudden interest in his phone or the wall. Mom surprised me the most. The first week after Dad's funeral, she was inconsolable. Her sobs echoed through the halls at night, and she couldn't even look at his photos without breaking down. But then something changed. 2 weeks later, I found her clearing out his closet. She worked methodically, sorting his clothes into neat piles: donate, keep, trash. Her mascara was perfect, her hair freshly styled. "Mom, are you sure about this? It's only been..." "Life goes on, sweetheart." She folded one of Dad's favorite sweaters with practiced efficiency. "We can't live in a museum." That evening, I tried to talk to Gareth about it. He sat at the kitchen counter scrolling through his emails, responding with non-committal grunts. "Don't you think it's weird how quickly she's moving on?" He didn't look up. Everyone grieves differently. "But she's already talking about redecorating his study. It's like she's erasing him." Gareth finally raised his eyes, but they were cold, distant. "What do you want me to say, Opal? That she should wear black and weep forever?" His words stung. I retreated to our bedroom, lying awake in the dark, listening to the hollow silence of our home. The bed dipped hours later when Gareth finally came up, but he stayed on his side, miles away despite being inches apart. The next morning, Mom was humming in the kitchen, making plans for a spa day. Her wedding ring was already off her finger. I watched her stirring her coffee, chattering about new beginnings, and wondered if I was the only one still drowning in grief. It didn't take long, 3 months to be exact, before she started acting like the old Fiora again, scrubbing off the grief like an annoying stain. I remember walking into the kitchen one morning, still bleary-eyed from another night of restless sleep, only to find her standing there in a vibrant green dress, pouring 2 glasses of wine. It was barely past 10. I didn't recognize her at first. Not just because her hair was suddenly in soft curls, dyed a shade of blonde that made her look younger than she had any right to, but she was laughing. A carefree, loud sound that sent a jolt through me. Then I saw him sitting casually at the dining table, laughing along with her. Bob. His leg was casually thrown up on another chair, like he'd been there forever, like he belonged. His hair still damp from a shower, wearing a wrinkled band tee and jeans that hung low on his hips. "Opal," Fiora waved her hand towards me and smiled, as if nothing about this whole situation was odd. "This is Bob." I stared. Blinked. So much for easing me into her new reality. Not that I would have been prepared for it, had she tried. What stood in front of me wasn't the grieving widow navigating the emotional wreckage. It was a completely different Fiora. One who now got overtly chummy with a guy young enough to be my, well, not exactly brother, but something grossly close. Bob smiled, dimples deepening. High, nonchalant. The kind of casual confidence that comes with being unaware or just not caring. My eyes flicked to his exposed arm, catching a glimpse of a hastily patched-up tattoo that curved along his bicep. Of course. Fiora filled his glass to the rim and plopped down across from him, their knees brushing under the table. Not an ounce of hesitation in her body language. It was like she hadn't spent the past 2 decades by my father's side. She didn't even flinch when I just stood there, dumbfounded, eyes wide. "Well?" She tilted her head, smirking. "Are you going to stand there all morning?" I muttered something under my breath and backed out, the air suddenly too thick in the room. Maybe I imagined it, but I could have sworn Bob's eyes followed me as I walked away. I visited Mom's house again a week later, hoping the shock of seeing her with Bob had worn off. The front door was unlocked, so I let myself in. Found them sprawled on the couch watching some reality show, Bob's arm draped around Mom's shoulders like he belonged there. "Hey sweetie," Mom chirped, not moving from her spot. "Join us," we ordered Thai. I perched awkwardly on the armchair, trying not to stare at how Mom's hand rested on Bob's thigh. The takeout containers littered the coffee table, and the wine bottle was already half empty. "Onto glass." Bob reached for an empty glass. "Your mom's got excellent taste in reds." That was Dad's wine collection, actually. The words slipped out before I could stop them. Mom's face tightened for a moment, but Bob just laughed. "Well then, Let's honor his memory with a toast. A few glasses in, the tension started to fade. Bob was telling stories about his college adventures, and I found myself laughing despite my initial discomfort. There was something magnetic about his easy confidence. You know what would be wild? Bob's eyes glinted mischievously as he topped off our glasses. The three of us should have some fun upstairs. The wine caught in my throat. Mom swatted his arm playfully while I forced out an awkward laugh. You're terrible, Mom giggled, but I noticed she didn't seem offended. I made some joke about needing to get home, but later that night, lying in my empty bed, Bob's words kept echoing in my head. Not because I wanted him, God no, but because of how the suggestion made me feel. Alive. Dangerous. When was the last time anyone had looked at me that way, like I was someone who could be reckless and desired? The fantasy took root, not about Bob specifically, but about being that kind of woman. Someone who could say yes to wild propositions, someone who could make men's heads turn like Mom did. In the darkness of my bedroom, I let myself imagine crossing lines I never would in daylight. I hadn't planned on it happening. I mean, sure, after that first remark, Bob's stupid smirk had wedged itself into my brain, and I may have thought too much about how easy it would be to just slip into that kind of chaos. But it was supposed to be a fantasy, something you chuckle about in the shower, then forget about when it's time to brush your teeth. But when Fiora invited me over again a few days later, there was something different in her voice. Warmer. Almost teasing. Like she knew what I was secretly mulling over and was just waiting for me to admit it. I didn't say anything right away, acted like I was hesitant, because wasn't I? But the truth was, the very idea of it had started pulling me in, even before I stepped into that house again. That evening, I caught myself pausing in front of a mirror a little longer than usual. My hair was looser than I normally wore it. I could hear Bob's voice echoing in my head, that cocky, nonchalant tone of his, and it made something deep within twitch. Still, I told myself it wasn't about him as I grabbed my keys and walked out the door. When I arrived at my mother's, the vibe felt strangely normal at first, like it was just another casual hangout. Fiora had her feet up on the coffee table, swirling wine. Bob leaned against the counter, talking about some inane college topic that didn't really interest me at all. But I caught the gleam in Fiora's eye when she greeted me, and suddenly everything felt amplified. The air thicker, the wine sweeter. My heart was racing before I'd even kicked my shoes off. And then it just happened. I didn't fight her when Fiora took my hand and led me upstairs, with Bob trailing behind us. My stomach was doing this wild flip, but I wasn't about to stop it. Maybe because a part of me wanted to see how far I could push it all. Or maybe I didn't feel like myself at all, and that was liberating in the strangest way. I remember the soft whisper of blankets, the weight of eyes on my skin. Afterwards, everything felt quiet. Too quiet. I slipped out of bed faster than I thought I would have, giving some excuse about needing to leave. Bob laughed, probably not even understanding why I felt the need to duck out the way I did. By the time I was halfway down the street to my car, my lips still tasted like him. My pulse hadn't stopped racing, not yet, but what kept hitting me was how simple it had been. The boundary I swore would be too hard to cross, barely a foothill. The first time was almost unreal, like some fever dream you wake up from but aren't quite sure if it happened. But I didn't wake up. Not really. In fact, after that, each meeting became more inevitable. That initial thrill, the reckless abandon, the way none of it felt quite so nerve-wracking after the first plunge, it started becoming easier to swallow. The guilt that should have clawed at me didn't come in full force the way I expected it to. Maybe it was because I didn't let myself think too hard about it. And pretty soon, it wasn't even difficult to say yes when Fiora asked. My first encounter with Bob and Fiora transformed into a weekly ritual. Every Thursday afternoon, I'd tell Gareth I was joining a book club. The lie slipped from my tongue easier each time. The drive to Mom's house became muscle memory. My heart raced with anticipation rather than anxiety now. Bob's car, a beat-up Honda Civic, always parked around the corner, our little secret from the neighbors. Mom kept the back door unlocked, welcoming me into their world without drawing attention. Wine flowed freely in the living room. The same room where Dad's armchair used to sit, now replaced by a modern loveseat. Bob mixed cocktails while Mom played her favorite jazz records. The familiar notes of Miles Davis filled the air as we shared our inhibitions along with our clothes. Back home, Gareth barely noticed the change in me. He'd grunt a greeting from behind his laptop, absorbed in work emails. His coldness made it easier to justify my actions. In his presence, memories of warm hands and shared laughter felt like a separate reality. The secrecy became intoxicating. Walking through the grocery store, I'd catch glimpses of neighborhood wives and wonder if they could tell. Did they see past my modest sweaters and sensible shoes? Could they sense the wildness beneath my carefully maintained facade? Mom treated our arrangement with the same practical efficiency she applied to everything else. She'd text me the time and add bring wine like we were planning a normal dinner party. Bob played along perfectly, maintaining the delicate balance between desire and discretion. One evening, sorting through laundry, I found one of Bob's receipts in my pocket, a coffee shop near campus. The paper crumbled in my hands as reality hit. He was younger than my brother. The guilt surfaced briefly before I pushed it down, filing it away with all the other uncomfortable truths I'd learned to ignore. But I couldn't stop. Each encounter felt like stepping further away from my grief, from Gareth's indifference, from the dutiful daughter and wife I'd always been. The thrill of our secret began to outweigh everything else. I started making excuses to see Bob alone. The first time was innocent enough. Fiora had a dentist appointment, but I showed up anyway, knowing he'd be there. We sat on the couch, drinking wine and talking about music. Without Fiora's presence, the conversation flowed differently, more personal, more real. Our solo meetings became more frequent. Coffee shops far from campus, quiet bars in neighborhoods where no one knew us. I told Gareth I was joining a yoga class, adding another lie to my growing collection. The guilt should have eaten at me, but each time I saw Bob's face light up when I walked in, it faded away. One rainy afternoon, we met at a small bistro downtown. Bob wore a blue button-down that brought out his eyes, and I caught myself staring too long. He reached across the table, his fingers brushing mine as he passed the sugar for my coffee. The touch sent electricity through my body. "Your hands are always cold," he said, holding them longer than necessary. We talked about everything, his studies, my work, our dreams. Things I used to share with Gareth before he built his wall of silence. Bob listened, really listened, leaning in when I spoke about my father's death. He understood grief in a way few people did. The affair evolved naturally, like water finding its path downhill. Hidden kisses in empty parking lots turned into afternoons in budget hotels. Each time I discovered something new about him. The small scar on his shoulder, how he hummed while getting dressed. The way he looked at me like I was the most fascinating person he'd ever met. With Bob, I felt seen again. Not as someone's wife or daughter or the responsible one who always did the right thing. Just me with all my messy desires and contradictions. The connection we shared was raw and honest, something I hadn't felt with Gareth in years. Maybe never. The secrecy added its own thrill, but it wasn't just about the excitement anymore. When Bob texted me random thoughts during the day or remembered small details about conversations we'd had weeks ago, it stirred something deeper than just physical attraction. Guilt gnawed at me as I prepared Gareth's favorite dinner, rosemary chicken with roasted vegetables. The aroma filled our kitchen, but the warmth stopped there. Gareth sat at his laptop in the living room, typing away with his back turned to me. The sound of his fingers hitting the keys echoed through our silent house. I placed his plate next to him, careful not to disturb his work. His shoulders tensed at my presence. The wall between us felt thicker than ever. "I thought we could eat together tonight," I said. He didn't look up from his screen. "I have a deadline." The same excuse he'd used all week. I retreated to the kitchen, leaving his untouched plate behind. Through the doorway, I watched him continue working as if I wasn't there. His jaw clenched tight, the same way it did whenever I mentioned being out with friends. Later that night, I curled up next to him in bed. My hand reached for his, but he pulled away, turning to face the wall. The coldness radiating from his side of the bed chilled me to the bone. "Are we okay?" I whispered into the darkness. Silence stretched between us for so long I thought he'd fallen asleep. Then his voice came, flat and hollow. "Why wouldn't we be?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. My heart pounded against my ribs. His breathing remained steady, controlled, too controlled. The same way he held himself whenever I mentioned where I'd been or who I'd seen. The distance between us in that bed felt infinite. I stared at his back, at the rigid line of his shoulders, and wondered if he could sense the guilt rolling off me in waves. If he could smell Bob's cologne lingering on my skin, despite my thorough shower. If he noticed how I avoided his eyes when lying about my whereabouts. The silence stretched on, heavy with unspoken words. Gareth remained turned away, his body language screaming rejection. I rolled to face the other wall, tears pricking at my eyes. I noticed Mum growing distant over the past few weeks. Her usual warmth replaced by calculated glances and tight-lipped smiles. The way she watched Bob and me when we were together made my skin crawl. Like she knew something but wasn't saying it. One evening, she suggested another threesome. My stomach dropped. I hadn't been alone with both of them since Bob and I started meeting privately. The guilt gnawed at me, but refusing would only raise more suspicions. "Sure, Mom. When?" "Tomorrow night." Bob's already confirmed. Her eyes never left mine, studying my reaction. The next evening I arrived at Mom's house, my heart pounding against my ribs. Bob was already there, looking uncomfortable. Mom poured wine, but something felt off. The usual playful atmosphere was missing, replaced by an underlying tension. We moved upstairs to her bedroom. The familiar routine felt mechanical, forced. Mom's phone buzzed on the nightstand. She ignored it at first, but it kept ringing. Finally, she grabbed it with an irritated sigh. "Hello." Her expression shifted from annoyance to shock. What are you talking about?" I froze, watching her face drain of color. She put the call on speaker. "Right now on the hub. The whole neighborhood group is blowing up about it. Is that really you, Fiora? And, oh my God, is that your daughter?" The room spun. Mom jumped up, frantically checking her phone. Bob cursed, grabbing his clothes. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. "You witch," Mom's voice cut through the chaos. "Mom, what?" "Don't." She held up her hand. "I know about you and Bob. I've known for weeks." The truth spilled out like poison. How she'd discovered our affair. How she'd gone to Gareth, playing the concerned mother. The hidden cameras they'd installed to catch me cheating. But Gareth wasn't supposed to, she choked back a sob. He wasn't supposed to stream it. He was just supposed to get evidence for divorce court. My husband. The man who barely looked at me anymore had orchestrated this public humiliation. Not just of me, but of his own mother-in-law. The video was probably spreading through social media like wildfire. "Your cold, distant husband," Mom laughed bitterly. "He's been planning this for weeks. Watching you lie, waiting for the perfect moment to destroy you. To destroy all of us." Bob stood in the corner, shirt half-buttoned, looking shell-shocked. I wanted to scream at him, at Mom, at myself, but no sound came out. The damage was done. Our secret was out in the most devastating way possible. My phone started buzzing with notifications, messages from friends, colleagues, neighbors, my entire life crumbling in real time as the video made its rounds. There would be no coming back from this. No explaining it away. No reset button. Mom's face hardened as she looked at me. "I wanted to catch you, to make you feel the betrayal I felt. But this," she gestured at her phone, still lighting up with messages, "this isn't what I wanted." The video spread like wildfire through our small community. My phone buzzed non-stop with notifications until I finally turned it off. Text messages, social media comments, emails, they all blurred into a cacophony of judgment and disgust. I sat in my car outside the grocery store, gripping the steering wheel. Mrs. Peterson from church walked past, caught my eye, then quickly looked away. She hurried inside, no doubt eager to share the latest gossip about the mother and daughter caught in adult scandal. The parking lot had become my refuge. I couldn't face going home where Gareth's silence cut deeper than any words. The house felt like a prison, every room tainted with memories of my lies. My wedding photos mocked me from their frames. A tap on my window made me jump. It was Sarah from my old book club, the real one, not my cover story. Her face held a mix of pity and revulsion. "Opal, I think it's best if you don't come to meetings anymore. The other ladies, well, you understand." I nodded mechanically. Another piece of my life crumbled away. The divorce papers arrived 3 days after the video leaked. Gareth's lawyer had been efficient, using my infidelity to push for everything: the house, our savings, even my grandmother's antique china. I signed without fighting. What right did I have? My mother tried calling dozens of times. Each time I let it go to voicemail. Her messages ranged from hysterical accusations to tearful apologies. "I never meant for this to happen, sweetheart. The cameras were just to catch you, to make you stop. I didn't know Gareth would. Please call me back." I deleted them all. Bob disappeared completely. No goodbye, no explanation. His number disconnected, his social media wiped clean. Smart move, really. He had a career to protect, a reputation to salvage. I was just collateral damage. The whispers followed me everywhere. At work, my colleagues avoided eye contact. My boss called me into his office, eyes fixed on his desk as he explained about company image and moral clauses. I was given 2 weeks severance and asked to clean out my desk immediately. I moved into a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. The owner didn't watch the local news, didn't recognize my face from the scandal. The room smelled of stale cigarettes and broken dreams, but it was a fitting punishment. My brother texted once, "You destroyed our family. Hope it was worth it." The isolation grew heavier each day. No friends called. No family reached out, except my mother's desperate messages that I couldn't bear to hear. The community that had once embraced me now treated me like a cautionary tale. Walking through town became an exercise in shame. People crossed the street to avoid me. Conversations stopped when I entered shops. Someone spray-painted whore on my car one night. The worst part wasn't the public humiliation or the divorce or even losing my job. It was the quiet moments when I had to face myself in the mirror, when there was no one left to blame but the woman staring back at me. The weight of my choices pressed down until I could barely breathe. I ran into my mother at the pharmacy. She looked smaller somehow, her carefully maintained appearance showing cracks. Her roots were showing grey, her clothes wrinkled. When she saw me, she started toward me, arms outstretched. I turned and walked away, leaving her standing between the vitamins and cold medicine, her hands falling to her sides. Her betrayal cut too deep for forgiveness, even as I recognized my own role in this disaster. The divorce hearing was quick and brutal. Gareth's lawyer painted me as a depraved woman who had betrayed not just her husband but her own mother. The judge looked at me with barely concealed disgust as he granted Gareth everything he asked for. Gareth didn't look at me once during the proceedings. As he left the courthouse, a young woman from his office touched his arm sympathetically. They walked out together, and I wondered if she'd been waiting in the wings all along, ready to comfort him in his time of need. I found myself driving past our old house one evening. The lights were on, warm and inviting. Through the window I could see Gareth in his favourite chair, the one I used to curl up in with him on Sunday mornings. He wasn't alone. The sight hit me like a physical blow, though I had no right to feel betrayed. My mother left town shortly after. I heard through distant relatives that she'd moved to Florida, trying to outrun her own scandal. She left no forwarding address, no way to reach her. Not that I would have tried. The motel became my permanent address. Each morning, I woke up to the same water-stained ceiling, the same threadbare carpet, the same hollow feeling in my chest. The manager stopped asking when I was checking out. I lost track of days, weeks. The scandal faded from social media, replaced by newer, juicier stories. But in our small town, memories ran deep. I became a ghost moving through spaces where I used to belong, now unwelcome and unseen. The isolation wrapped around me like a second skin. No more book clubs, no more church socials, no more family dinners. My world shrunk to the space between my motel room and the diner where I eventually found work, serving coffee to truckers who didn't know my story and didn't care to ask.
Hey everyone, if you enjoyed the story, remember to like, subscribe and comment on the video for more stories like this. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss an update. If you have any similar stories to share, leave them in the comments and we'll make sure to bring them to life. Thanks for watching.